Thank you to the Trickster Orchestra from Berlin. Thank you very much, Trickster Orchestra from Berlin, a collective with more than 50 musicians in different combinations and settings, and they play new music, classics, electronic, jazz, hip-hop, and also improvisations, and they play traditional European, Western, and Central and East Asian instruments and computers. And you will hear a number of pieces tonight by the Trickster Orchestra. And the question is how to keep the musical knowledge, which is part of our tradition, alive and meaningful. You just heard the piece Ma'ashudan Nubinu, the new We, composed by Jimin Samawati, and the text was written together with Ali Abdullahi. So we hear more from them later. I'm happy to welcome all of you tonight. It's a great pleasure to have you here, just 1 month before the Frankfurt Book Fair, but without these stuffed and crowded and noisy halls and grey business negotiations, but with lots of writers from all over the world and lots of time and places for encounters, speeches, and texts. So speaking, that's important, and it reminds us of the power of the language, and some feel warm when close to stories and histories, but others want to oppress the statement of your opinion, and Francesca Melandri will tell you much more about this dimension. This is not meant to be a place where there is embarrassing silence. If there is silence, then in order to reflect, and we hope to have heat and closeness and language and speaking. Welcome to the ILB 23. Flames, heat. The Nazis burned books 90 years ago, but they did not manage, and they could not extinguish the words and the stories. And the ILB 23 remembers the 90th anniversary of the book burnings. But we do not only look back, we also look at current problems of censorship and the oppression. And that's why we do have the special 1933-2023, and we will start with an excerpt from Pünktchen und Anton by Erich Kästner, read by Celia Spickoff. She's the winner of the reading competition of the German book trade. She's 11 years old and she's from Berlin.
Darf ich dir eine Frage stellen vorher, Celia? Yes. Was aus Pünktchen und Anton wirst du denn nicht vergessen?
I would like to ask a question. What will you not forget from Pünktchen und Anton? I won't forget that she was really brave, Pünktchen. That is, she went and talked to Anton's teacher in order to keep him from writing a letter to Anton's mother because he hadn't done his homework. Right. Enjoy the reading.
Ein Hund wird rasiert. Piefke machte gleich an der ersten Laterne Station. Als die Kinder weiter wollten, lief er nicht mit. Pünktchen musste ihn ziehen. Er rudelt schon wieder, erklärte sie. Gib mal her, sagte Anton. Das werden wir gleich haben. Er packte die Leine und zog sein Taschentuch aus der Tasche, dass man einen weißen Zipfel leuchten sah. Dann rief er, Piefke! Der Dackel hob den Kopf, betrachtete den Zipfel neugierig und dachte, das ist was zum Fressen. Und als Anton weiterging, wackelte er eilig hinterher, blickte dauernd nach dem Taschentuch und schnupperte. Großartig, erklärte Pünktchen. Eine glänzende Idee, das muss ich mir merken. Wie findest du eigentlich unser Haus? Fragte er. Ziemlich schrecklich, was? Es sieht ein bisschen verwahrlaust aus, meinte sie. Wie? Fragte er. Verwahrlaust, sagte sie. Gefällt dir das Wort? Das ist von mir. Ich entdecke manchmal neue Wörter. Vermometer ist auch von mir. Vermometer statt Thermometer? Rief er. Du meinst es auch nicht gerade böse. Und ob, sagte sie. Wollen wir mal Gelächter spielen? Sie wartete gar nicht ab, ob er wollte oder nicht, sondern nahm ihn bei der Hand und murmelte, oh je, mir ist gar nicht lächerlich zumute. Ich bin tief, tief traurig. Anton sah sie verwundert an. Sie machte große Augen und hatte eine Falte auf der Stirn. Oh je, sagte sie. Mir ist gar nicht lächerlich zumute. Ich bin tief, tief traurig, wiederholte sie. Dann knuffte sie ihn und flüsterte, du auch. Anton tat ihr den Gefallen. Oh je, brummte er. Mir ist gar nicht lächerlich zumute. Ich bin tief, tief traurig. Und ich erst, murmelte sie erschüttert. Oh je, mir ist gar nicht lächerlich zumute. Ich bin tief, tief traurig. Und weil sich beide anblickten und weil sie beide solche Leichenbittermienen aufgesetzt hatten, lachten sie aus vollem Halse. Oh je, mir ist gar nicht lächerlich zumute, fing nun Anton wieder an, und nun mussten sie noch mehr lachen. Schließlich konnten sie sich überhaupt nicht mehr ansehen. Sie lachten und kicherten, fanden kein Ende und bekamen kaum noch Luft. Die Leute blieben bereits stehen. Und Piefke setzte sich hin. Jetzt sind sie völlig übergeschnappt, dachte der Dackel. Pünktchen hob ihn hoch, und nun gingen die Kinder weiter. Aber jedes blickte in eine andere Richtung. Pünktchen gackerte noch ein paar Mal in sich hinein, dann war auch das vorüber. Alle Wetter, sagte Anton, war das anstrengend. Ich bin vollständig zerlacht. Er wischte sich die Lachtränen aus den Augen. Und dann waren sie beim Friseur. Der Friseur hatte einen ganz kleinen Laden. Man musste ein paar Stufen hochklettern. »Guten Tag, Herr Habekus«, sagte Herr Anton. »Ich soll mir die Haare schneiden lassen.« »Schon recht. Nimm Platz, mein Sohn«, sagte Herr Habekus. »Wie geht's der Mutter?« »Danke für die Nachfrage. Es geht ihr besser, aber mit dem Bezahlen geht's noch nicht besser.« »Wieder wie das letzte Mal«, sagte Herr Habekus. »20 Pfennig Anzahlung, den Rest in Raten, hinten kurz, vorne etwas länger, ich weiß schon. Und das kleine Fräulein?« »Ich bin bloß Publikum«, erklärte Pünktchen. »Lassen Sie sich durch mich nicht stören.« Herr Habekus band Anton ein großes weißes Tuch um und säbelte mit der Schere drauf los. »Kitzelt's schon?« fragte Pünktchen gespannt. Sie konnte es nicht erwarten. Und weil Anton nicht antwortete, sondern mäuschenstill saß, dachte sie sich rasch etwas anderes aus. Sie setzte Piefke auf den zweiten Stuhl, band ihm ihr Taschentuch um den Hals und schmierte ihm Seifenschaum um die Schnauze. Piefke hielt den Schaum zunächst für Schlagsahne, aber weil das weiße Zeug nicht schmeckte, zog er die Zunge wieder zurück und schüttelte den Kopf. Pünktchen tat, als ob sie ihn rasierte. Sie schabte ihm mit dem Zeigefinger den Seifenschaum allmählich wieder vom Fell, tanzte um ihn herum und unterhielt ihn dabei, wie sie es bei Friseuren beobachtet hatte. »Ja, mein Herr«, sagte sie zu dem Dackel, »das sind Zeiten. Ist Ihnen mein Zeigefinger scharf genug? Das sind Zeiten. Es ist zum...« Sie wissen schon, was ich meine. »Stellen Sie sich vor«, bitte die andere Seite, »stellen Sie sich vor, wie ich gestern nach Hause komme, hat meine Frau Drillinge gekriegt. 3 Zelluloidpuppen, lauter Mädchen. Und auf dem Kopf wächst ihnen rotes Gras. Soll man denn nicht verrückt werden? Und wie ich heute früh den Laden aufmache, steht der Gerichtsvollzieher schon drin und sagt, er müsse die Spiegel abholen. Warum, frage ich den Mann. Wollen Sie mich ruinieren? Tut mir leid, sagt er. Der Finanzminister schickt mich, Sie essen kein Rhabarber. Gegen den Strich, Herr Piefke? Wovon sind Sie übrigens so schön braun? Ach so, Sie benutzen Höhensonne. Eine halbe Stunde später kam der Minister persönlich. Wir haben uns geeinigt, ich rasiere ihn eine Woche lang umsonst, täglich 10-mal. Ja, er hat einen sehr starken Bartwuchs. Wünschen Sie Kölnisch Wasser? Ich werde nächstens verreisen. Der Zeppelin sucht für seine Nordpolfahrt einen seekranken Friseur, der soll den Eisbären die Haare schneiden. Wenn es Ihnen recht ist, bringe ich Ihnen ein Eisbärfell mit. Puder angenehm?
Genau. Danke. Ich glaube, genauso hat sich...
This is what Eric Kästner certainly had in mind in terms of reading. There is a special program for children and young people, and this is also sponsored by the Federal Cultural Foundation. And what else to expect? You will hear from the new director of the ILB. A very warm welcome, Lavinia Frey.
Welcome literature, welcome words,
welcome thought, poetry, and silence to Berlin, the capital of literature and freedom. I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to our writers and authors who have traveled to us from many parts of the world for these 11 days. Dear Minister of State for Culture and the Media and patron of the International Literature Festival Berlin 2023, dear Claudia, Roth. Dear Andreas Görgen, head of the Office of the Federal Government Commissioner for Culture and the Media. Dear colleagues from the BKM, dear Senator for Culture and Social Cohesion, dear Joe Chialo. Dear colleagues of the Senate administration, dear members of the board of the Peter Weiss Foundation for Art and Politics, dear Barbara Walster and Johannes Kister, dear Secretary General of the Federal Cultural Foundation, Markus Hilgert, dear Director General of the State Library of Berlin, Achim Bonte, dear Ulrich Schreiber, a very warm welcome, dear Francesca Melandri, dear Manjeet Mann, dear Celia Spikoff, dear Navid Kermani, dear Vivian Perkovic, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience here in this hall and in the stream and in the public viewing. Our programs shakes and broadens horizons and connects across borders, because the writers bring us closer to their view of the world. They challenge us in supposed certainties and cause us to see ourselves in new ways. Literature deals not only with what is, but also with what could be. Literature precedes life. Literature allows knowledge to circulate. And this is what the International Literature Festival Berlin magically brings together and about. It creates spaces for inspiration, for new discoveries and new connections. Manjeet Mann opened the space this morning. So he opened the space in the morning in the Young and Children's program. Francesca Melandri will follow now with her speech, The Ultrasound of Silence, and Navid Kermani was the premiere of the Alphabet 2S. And since I'm often asked which writer I am particularly looking forward to, I can only and always say to each and every one of the 150, that's why they are here. And yet tomorrow, I'm looking forward to Cheong Myung-Kwan. The day after tomorrow, to Maxim Biller, Irene Vallejo, Norman Ola, Yavuz Itkinci, and then Salman Rushdie, Amanda Liko, Nino Haratwili, and many, many others. In terms of content, this year, we ask, how will we live on our planet in the future with finite resources? We are looking for images and self-images. We are curious about how gender roles will change and how, for example, women writers will shape social utopias. That we stand before you today is thanks to the ILB team. The team has not only done an outstanding job in terms of programmatic content and implementation, it has also ensured that the festival develops, that new leadership is possible, that new ways of working are tested together, and above all, that a climate of openness, trust, and solidarity is possible. The team gives space to a diversity of voices and ideas so that this great international festival flourishes. A special thank also goes to the volunteers who support the festival, so please give them a hand. The team and the volunteers, many of them are in this hall. And of course, I'm especially pleased that the founder and longtime director of the festival, Ulrich Schreiber, is here today. A special thank you for 22 years of service to the festival awaits you on Saturday. On Saturday, in an excellent, brilliant event with many companions. Now, where do we want to go in the future? What's our vision? Now, Berlin is international, and we would like to see even more networking throughout the year with the international scene here in Berlin. What can we think about and develop together that will then break through during the festival? And secondly, curation is international, and we would like to involve international guests in the curation from the beginning. So we would like to invite them to think and design the festival together with us so that polyphony is guaranteed from day one. And of course, we want a sustainable festival. We would like to be able to invite our international guests to Berlin for a longer period of time, not just a few days for some extraordinary events, but a permanent exchange and encounter with colleagues here in Berlin. We could exchange ideas about the topics that concern us and learn from each other. 2023 is the year of transformation, and I am pleased that those who have not only made this transition possible, but have been instrumental in supporting it are here today. Many thanks to the BKM and to the Senate Department for Culture and the Office of the Capital Cultural Fund. Many thanks also to the board of the Peter Weiss Foundation for Art and Politics. Now, the festival is also about cooperation, so I would like to thank for the support, the trust, and the great cooperation to our main sponsors, the Federal Cultural Fund, and of course the Cultural Foundation of the Federal States, and to our cooperation partners at the venues, the Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin, where we are guests today, and in the next few days, the Haus der Berliner Festspiele, where we will be guests from Monday onwards, the Berliner Ensemble, Collegium Hungaricum, the Bertelsmann Foundation, the representative office of Bertelsmann, Instituto Cervantes, Silent Green, Documentation Center, Flight Expulsion, Reconciliation, and many others. And I would like to also thank our media partners, Radio 1, RBB Culture, Arte, Tagesspiegel, Siegessäule, and Himbeer, and of course the Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Berlino for sponsoring the opening, the Fondation Jan Michalski, which has helped us make the festival possible for years, but also the Temporal Communities Cluster of Excellence and the contestations of the Liberal Script Cluster of Excellence, Penn Berlin, Zentrum Liberale Moderne, Einstein Foundation, Literaturstadt Berlin, and many other foundations and institutions. Without them, this festival would not be possible. And of course, I would like to thank my family and my friends who have helped me a lot in the last few months. And let me also remind you of the book tables. You can buy books from Dussmann, and we have the Intercontinental book table, because literature is and will be. I'm looking forward to a wonderful festival.
Vielen Dank, Lavinia.
Thank you very much, Lavinia Frey. Claudia Roth not only likes to read books, in which writing is used as a statement against taboos. For example, The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. She herself is an author, and in 2016 she wrote a book together with the musician Festum. And the blurb says, "An end to the welcome culture and the rise of right-wing populism threaten the progress that has been achieved in Germany over the past decades. And the outright rejection of our fundamental liberal democratic order is now coming from the right. Now it's time to stand up to them. At the time, she was still vice president of the German Bundestag. Today, in the general debate at the German Bundestag, she wrote in favor of cultural policy. Now she's Minister of State for Culture, and she can support organizations and institutions in their undertaking to oppose. Thank you for being here and doing this, Claudia Roth, and welcome.
Und liebe Celia, jetzt muss ich ganz...
And dear Celia, now I will have to dig out my Erich Kästner books. You did beautifully. Thank you so much. This was an outstanding kickoff. Friends of the wonderful International Literature Festival here in Berlin. I'm thrilled to see you all here. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be patron of this fabulous festival. If the tyrants of the world had read the little treatise entitled Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, which was published in Bordeaux in 1574, they would definitely have had a reason to be afraid. The author and legal scholar Etienne de la Boétie asks his readers, both male and female, how it can happen that so many people, so many villages, towns, and peoples had to endure so often a single tyrant who nevertheless has no more power than they bestow upon him. And he garnishes this question with a remark that only those fall slave to an autocrat to whom it is impossible to say a single syllable. No. This no to tyranny, to arbitrary rule, to oppression had never been shouted louder in European literature before. La Boétie's little treatise was revolutionary, in the best sense, that is, and in just a few pages, it fulfilled the requirement that Franz Kafka placed on literature in his famous words. I quote, "A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us." A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. This is what makes literature indispensable. This is what makes the International Literature Festival in Berlin so valuable. And this is why the days ahead of us are days we should celebrate. For 10 days, we will welcome, for the 23rd time, literature from all over the world to Berlin. And with it, around 140 writers and authors from more than 40 countries who will come together at 150 events plus. At the same time, the International Literature Festival Berlin is opening a new chapter this year. It is the first festival that is directed by Lavinia Frey. I congratulate you, Ms. Frey, and the entire festival team on putting together such an exciting and promising program. You show that festival formats can be further developed in a very sophisticated way, and that personnel changes do not have to be changes of direction, but can rather be milestones on the path that lies ahead. For this, I would like to say thank you to you and your staff who have had to face particular challenges in recent times that they had to overcome, that they did overcome, and this is a very, very clear thank you. My special thanks also goes out to you, dear Ulrich Schreiber. You launched this festival 22 years ago. As a festival director, you have ensured that the International Literature Festival Berlin has become a recognized and respected, very well respected institution in the world of literature. It is not just one out of many literature festivals. Thanks to you, dear Mr. Schreiber, it has acquired socio-political weight and an international character that many rightly envy the International Literature Festival Berlin for. This uniqueness is your work and your merit, and we all want to thank you for that. I'm sure that this decision could not have been easy for you to lay the child that grew up into younger hands. You deserve a lot of respect and appreciation for that. I'm sure you have made the right decision, and I'm quite positive that we will keep meeting in literary context again and again, maybe possibly even in Odessa. I thank you for being here tonight. You set the course for the future of the International Literature Festival Berlin. Thank you very much. The fact that the International Literature Festival Berlin is going to develop further and be fostered, this is something that the Capital Culture Fund will wake over and will contribute to it. The ILB has taken root in Berlin and is an attraction on the city's cultural agenda, and it should stay that way. But its charisma, its radiance extends far beyond city and state borders. This is ensured by a broad spectrum of themes, genres, and formats. This diversity of event manifestations this year ranges from lectures behind bars to paperback swap parties, all the way up to pop-up comic fairs. Alongside the question of what influence AI technologies will have on our way of dealing with literature in the future, there will be reflections on podcasts or possible forms of coexistence between print and digital. This year, again, we will have internationally renowned voices here to be heard at the festival. Salman Rushdie will be broadcast live from the United States for his book launch of the new novel. We are looking forward to Booker Prize 2022 winner Shihan Karuna Tilaka from Sri Lanka, to Navid Kermani, to Ilya Troyanov, to Borachung, to Moshta Hilal, to Nino Hartashvili, who sweetened an entire holiday with this tome of 1,200 pages, as well as Manjeet Mann and, last but not least, Luisa Neubauer. But we are also looking forward to discovering new voices. Contemporary Afghan literature will be presented, and we will learn something about writing in exile. This is a topic that is particularly close to my heart. In a city such as Berlin, which has such a huge significance in this context and which has increasingly become a city of exile, artists and authors report on the Russian policy of repression against protest movements of the civilian population, while on Graphic Novel Day, we will be able to experience contributions from Ukraine, to give you just a very small insight. Literature. Literature is, of course, also allowed to be escapist, but escapism, just think of Kafka's Acts, is not a prerequisite of literature by no means. Quite to the contrary, by telling, writing, reading, and listening to stories, we find our bearings in the world. the sphere of fiction opens up new paths of understanding for us. Dear Ms. Melandri, in a conversation on the occasion of an award ceremony, you describe the author as a kind of medium, as being the creator of characters in a novel. You have to muster deep empathy, not for their actions, but for their humanity. And that is exactly the point. Rarely have understanding and empathy been more important than today. Around the world, however, those who stand up for the freedom of speech increasingly have to fear threat and persecution. I quote, "Wherever freedom of expression is restricted, we writers have the most to lose." End quote. This is how you, dear Navid Kermani, aptly put it. Please allow me to add, writers have everything to lose in a country without freedom of expression and the arts. Because where there is no room for free speech, writers have lost their place. This is why we must stand up for the freedom of expression, unmistakably, again and again and everywhere in the world. Freedom of expression is a human right, as is freedom of the arts. Neither of these freedoms can be imagined without the other. If one dies, so does the other. Together with them, it is also the end of democracy. At a time when many foundations are beginning to totter, it is indispensable to read and know about each other, to be in dialogue and free exchange. That is why we should do one thing above all: listen. Listening is one thing. The other is to make suppressed voices heard, so that they can say no to injustice and abuse of power in the spirit of French humanist La Boétie. And the International Literature Festival Berlin is a perfect forum for this. It broadens our horizons. It opens up free spaces for exchange and personal encounters at eye level, for coming together and networking across all languages and national borders. And due to the fact that at the International Literature Festival, it's above all about reading and it's about inspiring young people to read, I don't want to miss out to alert you to the cultural paths. It's a success. 2,000 books were read by the young people who received this pass this year in the first few weeks. So this is a great tendency for literature, for the Literature Festival, by the way. These books are definitely on the in first place. They are promoted by theaters, museums, and festivals. But you know that all of these activities are popular, but people want to read. So this is something that we need to foster. I would like to wish us all a lot of good insights, inspiration, joy in reading, listening, discovering. Enjoy the next 10 days. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Ich sag mal,
So I suppose opening speeches by Claudia Roth are always on fire. Thank you, Claudia Roth. Berlin is the German city where, contrary to the rest of the Republic, The German abbreviation AGB does not stand for Allgemeine Geschäftsbedingungen, that is terms and conditions, but for Amerika Gedenkbibliothek, America Memorial Library, whose pop-up, that is the supplementary building, was just opened by Senator for Culture Joe Chialo this weekend. And then he may have solved the central and state libraries' lack of space with the idea of having them move to Friedrichstraße once the Galerie Lafayette move out. So when it comes to books, he has already initiated quite something in his first 4 months in office as Senator for Culture and Social Cohesion. Welcome, Joe Chialo. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Frey, Mr. Schreiber, Minister of State, Roth, dear Claudia, Mr. Gerken, Professor Hilgert, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you also on behalf of the governing mayor to the opening event of the 23rd International Literature Festival here in Berlin. Literature is language that doesn't die, and language is the infinite soul of literature. Literature preserves culture, and literature relays culture. It has the potential of existing across generations and preserving cultural heritage, not only preserving it, but also relaying it, bestowing it on further generations, and establishing a cultural dialogue across eras and generations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a huge honor and a joy for me to open the Berlin International Literature Festival together with you today. But before we turn a new page together in this festival's success story, I would like to turn back briefly and thank the festival's founder, Mr. Schreiber. I would like to add to what Claudia said. Dear Ulrich Schreiber, you founded this literature festival, and in its 22 years, you have made it a globally respected institution, and for that I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, Hermann Hesse said, "There's always something magic about a new beginning." The next pages of this story will now be written by your successor, Lavinia Frey. In this process, a new leaf will certainly be turned over, both organizationally and programmatically. Dear Lavinia Frey, we are all excited. We wish you all the best. You can rely on my support and the support of my Senate administration looking ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at the program is tremendously promising. More than 140 authors, writers from around 40 countries will appear at more than 130 events during the next 11 days. They will discuss their work and their view of the world and, of course, read from their latest works. I think it is fantastic, dear Ms. Frey, that in addition to the big names from all over the world, you have also invited writers who are far less known outside their home countries. Intellectual exchange, is undoubtedly promoted, and our horizons are broadened by this festival of world literature. And this brings me to two topics with relevance for the future that I set particularly great store by. Cultural exchange with our neighboring continent, Africa, and the use of artificial intelligence in the field of culture. Fortunately, there are also events related to Africa within the context of this festival. Why am I mentioning that? Especially in the news coverage on Africa, two topics are high on the agenda: refugees movements on the one hand, and there's an attempted coup every second day, more or less, it feels like. But Africa is much more than that. And this is being shown here because this is what it's about. And please have a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, the audience can look forward on the reading by award-winning Itza Lahumio. In my opinion, paying attention to Africa is very important, and this is where changes of perspectives happen. I think this is very precious. These are really positive developments for the literary world. I'm convinced that good old Goethe, who is said to have been one of the first to coin the term world literature, would be thrilled by this festival. Ladies and gentlemen, however, the world has changed considerably compared to the living environment of the Weimar Privy Councillor. And this brings me to my second point, the future topic of artificial intelligence. AI will have a great impact on the world of literature. No one can predict how it will develop, but one thing is certain: the working conditions of writers will change. Certainly the work of translators as well, and the presentation and communication of literature. This will change the work of the many people who are active in this field. We've all witnessed it. The American Authors Guild's incendiary letter to the operators of AI companies against the use of their works was a first beacon of a new era. I therefore think it is great that an event on the topic of arts meets AI, blessing or curse, will also be taking place at the ILB. It is a really important topic. Well, join this person in the applause. Don't let them hanging. It is an important topic that will play a major role for the entire art and cultural landscape and raises many political, legal, aesthetic, ethical, and philosophical questions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not an exercise, but these are relevant and topical questions that are being discussed, which is why I would applaud your contribution. While we are on the subject of the future, I would like to emphasize that the targeted and stimulating communication of literature to the widest possible circle, especially of young readers, is very important for me. At the beginning, there was mention about it, and to close, I would like to mention that it would be great if you understand literature not as something that happens in the ivory tower and only for a select group of people in our society, but to make it available to the wide public and to make this festival a place of togetherness, of encounters here in the center of Berlin. If you all want to support us in bringing the ZLB library to Friedrichstraße, creating such a platform for encounter and dialogue in the center of Berlin, this would be great. However, I won't step off the stage without saying a few words of thank you, and I want to thank the Capital Culture Fund for enabling the ILB to take place for the 23rd time. Thank you, Claudia. Thanks also to the Cultural Foundation of the Federal States, which supports the program for children's and young people's literature very much for their funding. Professor Hilgert, I would also like to thank you personally for your support. Now, dear Ms. Frey, I would like to thank you personally very much for organizing and hosting this festival. I reiterate that you have our support on behalf of the Senate administration. And now, without further ado, have fun. The opening speech will be given by a writer who has always dealt in her work not only with silence, but with the echoes that history, great politics, but also personal traumas and incidental encounters have in the fate of their characters. She writes in a way the contingency of life into which we are born, but which has an impact over generations. Something that also works across generations is the ultrasound of silence. That is the title of Francesca Melandri's opening speech. Let's have a round of applause.
The ultrasound of silence. Many years ago, someone gave me a portrait drawing manual. It promised that even a person like me, not a visual artist, would be able to draw portraits with verisimilitude and capture not just the subject's likelihood, but also their character. The main instruction, in order to achieve this realism, was: don't draw the shape of the person's features, but of the empty space around them. Don't draw the forehead, the nose, the lips. Don't draw what you want to draw, but its absence. Draw what is not there, not what is there. The results were uncanny. Although drawing has never been my favorite means of expression, I've always felt more at home with language and music. With this technique, I could indeed draw somewhat realistic portraits, something which I had never been able to do until now. They were by no means good, nor visually interesting, but they did look like my subjects. They did render their likelihood, and even, as promised, their expression. I didn't pursue my portrait drawing career, but I never forgot the surprising experience of seeing the reality of the visual world appearing not when I tried to portray it directly, but by drawing its emptiness. As a writer, this experience is very familiar to me, and I'm sure many of the writers in this room will know exactly what I mean. The deepest meaning, relevance, power of expression in the texts I create is very often not so much in the words which I write, but in those which I don't. The core of the text, its energy, if you will, lies not so much in the words as in the blank spaces between them. And it's what is left implied, unsaid. The empty space, those silences, are where the communication between me, the author, and the reader can happen. Without those silences, without those missing words, if my text were to be filled completely with meaning, descriptions, details, explanations, with each and every word expressing what I have imagined, no communication would be possible. The reader would have nothing to do. Silence is where the book I write can come alive. Its silences are where it achieves, or doesn't achieve, its task, which is to create in readers an active experience. And that experience can be obtained only when they can fill the gaps, when they can actively take on the voids. Space and silence are where I, the author, invite the reader to be my co-creator. Without silence in a text, no communication can happen. Therefore, no literature. This is the ultrasound of silence, the powerful hidden resonance of what is left unsaid. This is where the real energy of communication is created. Silence is where language becomes more than just sound plus meaning. It becomes an ultrasound which creates a lived experience. Silence is where language stops being just words and turns into life. But the power of silence goes well beyond the literary experience. It is enacted, of course, in personal relationships. Our emotional lives are shaped almost more by what is left unsaid than by what is actually said. This is a truism. As a small girl born in an average Western family, I could clearly feel from a very small age that what my parents did not talk about at the dinner table was much more important, consequential, and interesting than their chit-chat. And we all know how power structures, from gender roles to class oppression to every other form of domination or abuse, whether collective or individual, famously thrives in silence. Every abuse is as powerful as the silence surrounding it. So, the simple act of refusing to keep silent about oppression is always the first necessary step in the struggle to end it. I would argue that since language was invented, silence, what is left unspoken, has always been one of the most powerful forces shaping the experience of our species. I would claim that since we have invented language, the ultrasound of silence is almost up there with the two main drivers of our biological survival, hunger and sex. Therefore, of our history. Indeed, one possible way to describe the evolution of human societies and culture is to trace what each generation has done with whatever silence has been handed to them by the previous ones. Whether they have filled it in with missing words or passed it on untouched to their children. It's not always a tale of progress, far from it. Times of silence have often followed times of lively expression, but precisely that is the dynamic. Here is a possible definition of history. The story of how the silences handed down from previous generations have or have not been addressed, and of the new silences which have or have not been created in this process, and of what successive generations have done with all of that, and so on and on. I'd like to give you a few examples of what I mean. The first one is spectacular, both in its relevance and in its consequences. It's the silence which lies right at the heart of the two founding documents of Western democracy, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I find it difficult to read these words and not feel some pride in, how to put it, well, pride in the human experience. What a remarkable species, this Homo sapiens sapiens, capable of coming up with such ideas. And yet, as Thomas Jefferson was penning those extraordinary words in his study in Monticello, there were hundreds of human beings just outside his window, whose very bodies were Jefferson's property, over whom he had absolute power of life and death, and whose whole existence not only was defined by the absence of liberty, but was the exact opposite of the conditions for the pursuit of any individual happiness. Those men and women outside Jefferson's window and bent over his tobacco fields are the ominous heart of silence inside the wonderful words he wrote. Some years later, the framers gathered in Philadelphia to write the American Constitution and came up with many of the revolutionary ideas which have kicked off that astonishing experiment, which we called Western democracy, which we Westerners, we pride ourselves so much into. And one of them was to claim freedom of speech as nothing less than the very first inalienable right which citizens must enjoy. And so the right to speak freely was enshrined in the First Amendment, the very first of the Bill of Rights. And yet, in many of those founding fathers' homes, there lived people who could be tortured to death if only they dared to answer back to their masters. This is the throbbing silence at the heart both of the Declaration of Independence and of the American Constitution, the word slavery. Many of the founding fathers knew perfectly well that slavery was wrong. Some of them, as devout Christians, even believed that it was a sin. But damn it, slavery was so profitable. It was such a great way to make money, so much money, out of this vast land they had come to occupy by way of genocide and colonization, incidentally, but that's another topic. Slavery was so good for them. Not so much for the enslaved people, of course, but what to do? Which is why to name slavery would have been deeply embarrassing. By naming it, by acknowledging that it existed, they would have been forced to declare what they meant to do with it. Keep it, abolish it, because this is exactly what declarations do. This is what constitutions do. They set the rules, the framework, the values. But if the founding fathers were stuck in this monumental ambivalence, or if you will, monumental hypocrisy, they may have hated slavery, but they liked it too. So they could not even bring themselves to mention it. One day, they told themselves, this obvious horror would surely be abolished, but when and how? Better to leave that unsaid. Better not to mention it at all. So Western democracy in its foundational documents is built around a silence. But it was a very powerful silence. Its power so ominous and great that it almost destroyed the young nation. To fill that silence and finally replace it with the word which should have been written, but wasn't, it took the most appalling bloodbath the USA would ever experience in its whole history. 500,000 men, countless civilians had to die in the Civil War so as to finally replace that silence with the unwritten word that lay at the heart of its founding documents. In 1865, finally, the word slavery was written in the American Constitution for the first and last time. The 13th Amendment abolished it with the sentence, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States." The abolition of slavery was enacted by the act of finally naming it. Slavery could be abolished only when its extremely material reality, a reality of bodies, chains, whips, hanging ropes, was finally freed from the jaws of silence. This omitted word, slavery, and the silence which took its place in the original Constitution continued to shape the history of the United States. Its ultrasonic power was by no means over with abolition and kept on producing very factual reality. The horrors of Jim Crow and the culture of lynching, the widespread terrorism against the African American community, the Tulsa Massacre and countless others, the displacement of almost 2 million African Americans, which historians call the Great Migration from the South, but which should be called an internal refugee exodus from unbearable violence. The chain gangs of convicts, forced labor, and today's mass incarceration. The urban segregation, which still shapes American cities decades after redlining is officially no longer legal, and which still separates those who have access to clean water, healthy food, decent housing, and a friendly police from those who do not. The struggle for the civil rights of 60 years ago and the present-day pushback against laws which once again try to suppress non-white people's vote as the USA gets ready for its next presidential election. And on and on. The ultrasound exuding from the silence which replaced the word slavery in the founding documents and which made possible both its horror but also the civic fight against it and its legacy has shaped American history, democracy, society, the judiciary, the healthcare system, labor relations, urban planning, and so much more to this day in ways which are still far from over and cannot be overstated, but which I also believe are still not completely acknowledged or even known by many of us Western Europeans when we try to make sense of what's going on in the United States of America. So much reality created by one single missing word. The second example is right here in Berlin, very near to where we are now. It's the monument to the Soviet army on the Straße des 17. Juni. It was built in 1945 as the Tiergarten was still a barren wasteland and Berlin a pile of rubble. You could call it a huge multimedia installation. It has a colonnade, steps, statues, even a tank. And it's dedicated to the Red Army's glorious victory over Nazism. Approximately 1 in every 20 female Berliners between the ages of 18 to 80 had just been raped by the soldiers of the Soviet army when it was erected. So the women of Berlin used to call it the monument to the unknown rapist. But then, what do women know about monuments? They're too emotional to understand the glory or victory. For some mysterious reason, women do not appreciate monuments glorifying their rapists. Go figure why. Unlike the other monument to the Red Army in Treptower Park, which was in the Soviet sector, this was in the British Western sector. But a treaty between the former Allies guaranteed that it would be preserved by the Western occupants, and so it always was, even after the wall was built. And its preservation was also explicitly agreed upon by the 1990 treaty, which defined the terms of Germany's reunification. The omission, the silence I want to mention here, is literally written in gold, in the big golden numbers on the central column, which, according to this monument, signal the dates during which the Soviet army fought and finally won the Second World War. These golden numbers are 1941, 1945. 1941 to 1945, the Great Patriotic War, the formidable fight against the Nazi invader, and finally, its defeat. What is the gaping silence here, which for almost 80 years now has been radiating from those golden letters? The very big silence indeed is the answer to the question. What exactly was the Red Army doing before 1941? Was it training in the barracks of the Soviet Union? Was it preparing for the imminent Nazi invasion? Not really. Just ask the Latvians, the Poles, the Estonians, the Finns, the Lithuanians, the Romanians. They will tell you that the Red Army was keeping itself quite busy by invading, occupying, killing those who resisted it. Just ask the descendants of the 22,000 Polish officers, journalists, intellectuals, public figures, and others slaughtered by the Soviets in the Katyn forest. Those two dates, have supported for almost 80 years the lie that the Soviet Union entered World War II only after Hitler invaded it. Instead, if that monument were truthful, the golden dates would be 1939, not 1941 to 1945. But of course it isn't. That's not what monuments are for, to tell history as it is. Monuments, especially grand monuments like this one, are very often the way by which history's silences get to be literally engraved in stone or in golden letters, like in this case. Golden letters which the Western powers promised to maintain and protect even after the dissolution of the USSR. In Italian, like in many other languages, we have the saying, speech is silver, but silence is gold. In the monument to the Red Army in West Berlin, this is not a metaphor. Here, silence is literally made of golden numbers on a marble column for all to see. After the war, indeed even since the very start of Hitler's invasion, to even mention the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in the USSR was a crime punishable by death. The Second World War was the great patriotic war against Nazism. It had started in 1941 with Hitler's invasion, full stop. To claim otherwise was to be a traitor. The 2 years from 1939 to 1941, during which Hitler and Stalin were allies and agreed to divide Europe between them, had to be erased from history books and personal memories. And so, those 2 silenced years, the golden numbers 1941 instead of 1939, became the cornerstone of the relationship between the USSR and the countries east of the Iron Curtain. Prague, 1968, Budapest, 1956, all the way back to Berlin, 1953, on that very 17th of June, which is honored by the monument's address. The history of the Eastern Bloc has been shaped by Soviet tanks crushing with blood the popular will. Liberation was the name given to something which would turn out to be much more violent, much more dark. Does this sound familiar? If it does, it's not a coincidence. It's a continuation. The silence, the ultrasound of silence, which throbs in those golden numbers, has been resumed and actively implemented again as a state ideology by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Putin worked for many years on the project of refocusing the great patriotic war as identitarian glue for the Russian people, as a glorified past compensation for the appalling lack of any vision he had to offer them about their future. Fast forward to 1922, and he framed the full-scale invasion of Ukraine as the continuation of the Great Patriotic War. He called an independent young democracy Nazism, and he called the bloody invasion liberation. But there is another uncomfortable silence within those golden letters. They don't only express the Soviet Union's official silence about those embarrassing 2 years during which it was Nazi Germany's ally, and its tragically bizarre revival by Vladimir Putin. They also express the silence of the West about all of the above. They express our silence. Of us Westerners, I mean. And I have an uncomfortable feeling, which definitely would take me much more time than this short speech to expound, so I will just give it to you as an impression. And it's this, that there is a direct link between the way we Westerners acquiesced and indeed signed treaties making us the guarantors and the protectors of the omission enshrined in those golden letters on the monument to the Soviet army, and the silent acquiescence we Western Europeans, specifically the citizens and institutions within the European Union, have had towards Russia's escalatory violence in the last 20 years. between how we didn't challenge nor change those false golden numbers and how we kept silent after Grozny was reduced to rubble, how we kept silent when Georgia was invaded, how we kept silent when Aleppo was reduced to rubble, how we kept silence as Igor Girkin's little green men turned Donetsk into one of the most violently grim places on earth, how we kept basically silent when Crimea was violently annexed, illegally annexed. I can't help but see in the silence we in the West kept towards this succession of Putin's crimes as a legacy of our embarrassed silence towards that very golden lie of omission up there on the monument on the Straße des 17. Juni. Some months ago, the great Russian writer Vladimir Sorokin said this: "The international community managed to dig a deep grave for the disgusting, dead corpse of Nazism, thereby putting it definitely behind us in the graveyard of history. But it failed to do the same with that of Stalinism, and I would add, of Russian imperialism." Here we are again, with this zombie-like reincarnation of old silent nightmares, old silent traumas. And today, as we speak, this horrible zombie is bringing unimaginable suffering and destruction to Ukraine. And here we are again with a liberation, which is in fact a bloody invasion. If in February 2022, I had been a portrait artist, tasked with drawing a faithful image of the community I feel so keenly a part of, alongside my being an Italian, of course, the European Union, I would follow the advice of that drawing handbook and would draw the lines not of what we did in these last 20 years, but of what we didn't do. Not of what we said, but of what we didn't say. That's where I would find a real face, a real expression. Therefore, also our collective responsibility as this genocidal war started. Silence is indeed a superpower. Silence and words, words and silence. History is created by the interplay of both. And just as in literature, there are hidden words within each silence, and there is also a core of silence within each word. The word liberty can conceal the silent pain of human beings forced to live and die enslaved. Or take peace, for instance, a beautiful word. Who doesn't like it? But it can also be used to silence justice. In this past year and a half, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many people in our comfortable West have repeated over and over the word peace, but never once saying the word justice. And the word justice, when it is left unsaid and silent within the otherwise beautiful word peace, is one of those powerful ultrasounds. Its absence produces events, terrible, very real events. It produces acquiescence to the torture chambers of Irpin, to the horrors of Bucha, to the flattening of Mariupol. Beautiful words like liberty or like peace can hold very dark silences indeed within their core. I see my job as a writer to always listen very closely to what is left unsaid, to never be satisfied by beautiful words, not even when they are as lovely as liberty or peace. I love liberty and I love peace, but my job is to listen to the silence which even the most beautiful word can hide within itself, and then to give that silence a name. Thank you.
Danke nochmal.
Thank you very much again, Trickster Orchestra under the artistic direction of Simin Samawati for the musical reflection on the ultrasound of silence. This was the improvisation on the omission, deletion, and absence of concepts and words, which is now also happening in my moderation, funnily. This culminated in a sonic conversation about how these omissions, these deletions, transform human interaction and space. So I'm wondering, you're waiting for me, but there should some rearrangement should be going on. I could, of course, do some chatting, but why don't you bring the furniture already? I thought it was really interesting how colorful and interesting the sonification of silence can be. It was a bit comic-like. It was very clandestine. And the speech by Francesca Melandri, and she and I needed this silence and the listening to the music in order to let the speech resonate, in order to leave you to bathe in discomfort for a while. staying put in discomfort can also help to not stay silent the next time and to be ashamed if you pick up on your own silence. I would like to ask Manjeet Mann to the stage. She already opened the Young Festival today. Also, I would like to ask Navid Kermani on stage, writer and a keen observer of rough geopolitics all the way to the nuances of everyday politics. And, of course, Francesca Melandri, please come to the stage. Put your hands together, please. I hope those of you who need translation have picked up a receiver to receive interpretation, because we will continue in English.
Racism and Russian imperialism in your speech. What else should we not remain silent about?
Everything. Everything. There isn't a category which is in and another which is out. One should not remain silent about those things that someone wants to keep silence on.
Herr Kermani, what do you say? What were those topics, or when you heard where we were silent and we weren't supposed to be silent, what did come to your mind? Which other topics are there to be taken out to the open?
Well, I was when you talked about Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of the Bill of Rights, and before his window, the slaves were working. I think this image was very strong. And I thought of those who are right now outside the window. And there are many people. We are talking about freedom, we're talking about liberty, we are very proud of ourselves, of our liberties and our rights, but we don't talk about those who are right now out of our window, like the economical system. I can only give one example, or maybe two. One example. I was just last year, I was in Madagascar, Eastern Africa. Madagascar is producing 0.01% of the worldwide emissions. But it's the 7th year in a row where there was a drought. And it was announced by the United Nations as the first climate change hunger catastrophe. Well, our way of life, which we enjoy very much with, good food and healthy food and all this, is on the back of large parts of the world. And we don't. So as long as we don't reflect about that all what we do, what I do, you, all of us, is producing poverty, catastrophes. It's the way we live. As long as we don't talk about that, well, there's a lot to say, remains to say. And I could continue with the country you have written so empathically about Ethiopia. Maybe in my last example, we are talking about, and I talk as well, about the war in Ukraine. White people die. 8,500 civilians have died until the summer. And I was one of the, of course, I'm in full solidarity of the people of Ukraine. But at the same time, in Ethiopia, in about 18 months, 500,000 people have died, and more, they say it's about 400,000 civilians. So we talk a lot about this 8,500, and it's correct to talk about that, but who knows at the same time about the 400,000 civilians killed in Ethiopia in the war? Maybe because they're black. I don't know.
And the problem maybe is also, it's not enough to talk about that once. We need to stir something in the silent majority that is always the problem besides the aggressors that we had and that we have. So the silent majorities during the book burnings, the silent majorities in social media where a loud public is portrayed that probably isn't even there, but the silent majority who doesn't say no, as you mentioned in your speech, is not there. So how do we do that? How do we get not some of us to speak out about Ethiopia and stuff like that, but how do we get the silent majority to take part and to take interest in what is happening? Manjeet.
Thanks.
You are three. It was obvious.
That's a big question. How do we get the silent majority? Well, I mean, we're all standing up here as storytellers, right? And I don't know who said this, but somebody said it once, cleverer than me, said the storytellers are the original truth tellers. So for me and for the others on this panel and everybody out there, it's about getting those stories out. For those who perhaps don't have that voice, then there are others of us that can tell those stories on their behalf. So for me, it's all about art. It's all about storytelling, giving voice to people who feel as though they have no agency. I mean, I do a lot of work, as well as being an author, I do a lot of work in the community. So I have a charity that I started a couple of years ago called Run the World. And I work with
You said
women.
that too fast. Nobody...
Oh, I am so sorry.
The name of the charity. I mean, use your podium when you can say the name of the charity, please.
So my charity is called Run the World, and I started it in 2017. And I work primarily with women and girls who feel like they're on the margins of society. So I have worked with women who are survivors of domestic violence. I have worked with women who have refugee-seeking status. And at the moment, I am working with incarcerated women, so in prison. So all of these women feel as though they have lost their voice. They have lost their agency out of fear, out of violence suppressing them, or obviously being incarcerated. And I work with them through storytelling. And I try and empower them through getting them to hear their own voices again and to tell their own stories. So this is on a micro scale. It's not on a global scale, but just as the individual, I am trying to empower women from those communities any which way I can. And I see it change them. And I see them grow in confidence. And I see them feel powerful again in places where they have had that taken away from them. So that's on a micro scale. So you take that to a global scale. You know, what could that do? So I think we know there are power in our words. So write those stories. And if we have that agency, then help other people that don't feel like they do. Give them a voice. Help them write their stories. Help them speak those stories out loud. And that's the only way we can create an educated and enlightened humanity. And without it, I think we remain very small and ignorant. So let's not be small. Yeah. Can I add?
Yes, please.
I would just like to somehow add to the wonderful words of both my fellow writers, but I feel a little uneasy at the idea that there is a silent majority and I am somewhere else. I belong to the silent majority. I have a cell phone which has what is called coltan, which produces incredible suffering in the Central African Republic. I am absolutely, and I speak for myself, I am absolutely part of the silent majority who keeps this world of injustice and things not said going. So for my part, the main thing is to look at the world, try and say it, that's my job, but also never forget my position in this world, and that's a position of incredible privilege. Even the fact that I'm here, speaking to you, I have words, and that is a privilege and an honor, and which has to be somehow handled with humility, if possible.
Thank you.
Yes, one point I would like to add, which strikes to me very important, at least for Germany. And we're talking about cultural exchange, and this festival is so wonderful because it brings writers from all over the world to Berlin. And I'm so happy, I'm thankful for Uli, I'm hopeful for Lavinia, and I'm sure that it will continue. But it's a year, and this is, I think, very relevant in our context, that the foreign cultural policy is reduced by 20% in Germany by the foreign ministry. And I think this is a disaster, because at least for me,
Und das geht dann sowas wie Goethe-Institut und so.
for the
Ja.
Goethe Institutes, for all of them, because for me, and I can tell you I see it by clothes. I go to these countries and I see how powerful, how important Kulturpolitik, policy is a little bit a strange word for this, but cultural work with other countries is so relevant for peace, for democracy, for everything, and this government cuts it by 20%. This is true for the same time we are standing now. So take this appeal and to think about this point, to continue the great work of those people who are on the front side of our intellectual exchange.
Thank you very much. Und ich bin froh, dass wir jetzt auch tatsächlich auch unangenehme Punkte aus dem Schweigen holen.
So,
I'll let you go into the night. Thank you very much. Your applause. Und ich möchte mich noch bedanken bei unseren Dolmetscherinnen Astrid Gese und Markus Grauer bei den Gebärden.
and I would like to thank our interpreters, Astrid Gese and Markus Grauer, and our sign language interpreters, and Katharina Erben, who translated Francesca Melandri's speech. Now, outside, you can visit the Dussmann book table to get signed books, and we have more by Navid Kermani, so get something to drink and come back in here, because das Alphabet bis S, so the alphabet until S, will be the next part of the evening. Thanks for being here, and have a lovely Alphabet.